when I win, it's not all, daisies and daffodils. Like, my dad will evaluate everything and say things. And sometimes I'll get a hard time in the gym, even if I've won a fight. It was always kind of crucial to kind of break down the fight, win or lose, and kind of evaluate it. Obviously, it wasn't always negative. Sometimes there was nothing else I could have done or whatever. But yeah, sometimes there was things to take on board. And I think that's what you've got to do, not kind of be in this bubble when you win, and yeah, kind of learn from it every time, every fight. Definitely.
Welcome to the Science of Building Champions podcast, where your host Don Heatrick chats with top-level fighters and coaches, diving into their stories to discover what makes champions.
Today I have the pleasure of speaking with Iman Barlow, aka Pretty Killer, fighting out of Assassins Muay Thai in Melton Mowbray in the UK, and winner of 19 world titles, I think it is, and an IFMA gold medal. That was just more recently. And let's see what happens now. She's got a contract with One Championship too. So thank you for joining me on the podcast, Iman.
No worries, thank you. I'm surprised that you pronounce my name like perfectly. People always get it a little bit wrong.
Well, I think it's helped in that I've heard your dad saying it. So I was like,
yeah.
I don't know which bit to kind of stress.
Yeah, I mean, it's spelt difficultly, so I get kind of all sorts, but yeah, very impressed.
And your brother's got an unusual name as well, hasn't he? Thai.
Yeah, Thai, like Thailand. Yeah. I think my mum and dad just loved it. I mean, there are a few people that I know called Thai, but it's spelt like differently.
Yes.
But yeah.
And Muay Thai's been, it's a family affair for you all, isn't it? I mean, we've mentioned your brother there, Thai. We've mentioned your dad, Mark Barlow, but your mum, Maxine, as well. You've all been, heavily involved in Muay Thai for a long time now. And I think actually, I'd probably be right in saying you're probably one of the first generation of Western Thai boxers that could give the Thais a run for their money in terms of how early you started training and started getting into all of this. And with your mum and dad running Assassins Muay Thai right from day one. But
yeah.
How did it all start for you? How did you get involved in Muay Thai?
Yeah, so basically I was a young girl, 3-4 years old, and so my dad runs Assassins Muay Thai, and my mum used to train to fight as well. So they used to take me along to classes and just kind of sit me in the corner with my toys, instead of getting a babysitter. It was just kind of easy. And then I think I just kind of started joining in with the adults, not because like I was told to, it just looked more interesting than sitting there with my toys. And that's what it was. I don't think we had too many kids classes back then. So I just used to copy the adults. They used to mess around with me and hold pads. And it just kind of started from there. I had my first fight when I was 4, obviously an inter-club fight. And, I loved it. And all I remember as a child is driving up and down the country and being somewhere different every weekend and competing. And it was quite cool, being with other kids doing the same thing. They were always a lot older, and it used to be like, holiday every weekend, but go and compete also.
So what was the objective then to, when you first started training? It sounds like it was an extension of play. You were having fun with it.
Yeah.
The idea wasn't to become a champion from those early days. That wasn't really in your mind?
No, of course not. Like, it's really hard, when you're older and you look back, but that's literally what it was. I was just having fun and kind of working my way up without realizing, I had a title fight when I was 5 or 6, and that wasn't a big deal to me. Like, I didn't really understand, and I had like this cool belt and I hung it up in my room. And then, we'd go Thailand for 6 weeks during our school summer holidays, and we'd train there. And I thought that was a normal holiday. It's not until I get back and ask everyone else where they've been, I'm like, all right. So all of these things kind of became the norm to me, and it wasn't a big deal. So I think it later on in life, when I had kind of the big stages and the big belts and the big fights, it meant a lot to me. Of course it did, but it also wasn't as much pressure as it might have been on someone else, because it was just like, another fight kind of thing. And that's just the way it was. I was also heavily involved in running. I used to do a lot of running anyway for my Thai boxing, but then I started competing for my school, like cross country, and I just kind of entered and I did really well. I think I came third in my first race, and it was like my year and the year above. So people that had come ahead of me were older, and then it just started from there as well with the running. And I ran from about the age of 11 to 14, 15, and I competed for the local running club Charnwood at Loughborough Uni. And that's the thing I used to do alongside my Thai boxing. I used to go there every Monday and Wednesday and run at the weekends. And even sometimes I remember I'd have a race in the morning and then a fight in the afternoon. Yeah, and at that age, that was just nothing to me. Again, it was just normal. So I'd like win my race in the morning and then come back to Melton, and there'd be a fight show and I'd fight someone in the afternoon. It is mental now you look back at it, but again, it was just normal.
And I think that's the thing as well. When you're younger, you have more capacity for recovery, so it's less of an impact as well. But also because it's a little bit more general what you're doing, rather than being sort of too super specific. It's actually good to have that, some different elements coming into what you're doing, rather than it being. I think that's something that people mistake really with juniors, trying to make them too specialized too early on.
No, definitely.
And almost there's something in the sort of training aspects in the sports science side of it. We call it long-term athletic development. There's a model for how you train juniors right through to be champion adults. And specializing too early is one of those things that's a red flag. The idea is not to have a champion child; it's to have a champion high-performing adult. And doing stuff too early, being too niche early on, actually sabotages all that. And it sounds like, whether that was by design or not, and you often find the people that have done well have almost accidentally got it right. And it's like, when I actually compare myself to what would be ideal, it's like, I wasn't far off of that at all. And even horse riding you were doing, weren't you?
Yeah, I was. So my auntie had some horses, and I used to do that. I used to love it. I don't think like I competed. I just used to ride and stuff. But there did come a time where, I had to not necessarily give it up, but, I didn't have time to do all three. So something had to give. That was probably the most expensive one. So we had to give that up. But I think I did so well with the running at first hand because of the Thai boxing. It was kind of like a normal thing for me. But then also, as it kind of moved on, the running complemented my Thai boxing also. So it worked hand in hand, and it went really well. It wasn't until I was about 14, 15, and I had like quite a bad back. I wouldn't say it was a back injury. It was just kind of like an ongoing thing. And I think I had like an MRI, and it said like four discs of my back, like all the liquid in them have dried up, and it's just like a bit difficult to understand. I mean, I don't have too many issues now with it, but I remember seeing a professor, and he said to me, the worst thing you can do is stop. You need to kind of carry on exercising through it. It's not going to damage it anymore. It can be painful, but you've kind of got to learn to deal and cope with the pain. And it's just like anything, being in a sport. I had a lot of, I had something called Sever's disease. So it was like pain. It's just growing pains, but pains in my heels, pains in my knees, my kneecaps dropped. So I had tape here and pads in my shoes, and it was just kind of trying to manage them kind of, I wouldn't say injuries, but just deal with the issues growing up, because you do have, your bones, or your body's growing too fast for your bones, and you're doing a lot of exercise as well and a lot of impact. So it's just kind of, that was like not a difficult time, but it was quite hard dealing with some of the pains and little things. Oh, I can't go out unless I've got my taped knees and stuff like that. But now you look back at it, you're like, oh, that was a lot of drama.
But that's also, it's great that you mentioned that, because it's part of that long-term athletic development model in it's appreciating that, you know, the kids that you're training are going through these things. There are growth spurts going on. There are extra stresses going on top of what you've got in terms of training stress, and it's balancing all that up and not training them like they're little mini adults, because they're not. It's kind of making it more playful, distributing the workload around a little bit, and expecting some stuff like you've mentioned there to actually come up. And it's, you know, you've got to be careful on what you're doing with your training a little bit around these things, and not just smashing on regardless, and trying to be like the perfect little junior athlete, when really that's not the game at all. It's beyond that.
Definitely. I think it's quite good to like be seen by someone quick and get advice, but sometimes a lot of people just want to stop, like, oh, I've got pains, I need to stop. But at the same time, not always stopping is the right thing. Not doing too much is also not the right thing. So you've got to kind of find the balance and get it right.
It's one of those things. This is where supplemental training, I think, is really useful, because sometimes you can't do 100% the sport you were doing, because that's created a load of overuse patterns that are contributing to the injury. So you need to kind of back off the volume of that. But like you say, you don't want to stop. So it's useful to find things that are complementary and work around it, and give you stuff you can work on that keep you kind of in fettle.
Exactly.
And get
do you want
you
me
back
to tell you
into
what
the game.
I used to do? It's
Go
crazy. So I used to, at one point, like, I thought I couldn't run because it damaged a lot of things. I bought this float, and you put it around your back and it like supports your back. I used to go to the local swimming pool and run. So like run in the pool, because that's the only way you could get like non-impact running. And as a teenager, like, I was so embarrassing, and just like people would think, what the but it almost like had to be done, and just so I could do little bits, and you know, I don't know, it was just so odd looking back at it.
That's great. That's a really good example, though, because you're still getting the patterns of movement that you wanted, but you're reducing all the impact.
So mad.
You're ahead of your time there, look.
Well, that's an idea that my dad got. He's full of them. But you know, like years later, it's like, yeah, it makes sense. Made me look like an idiot, but it benefited.
Character building, as my dad would always say.
Yeah.
So obviously, you know, your mum and dad being a big influence on what was going on with what you were drawn to, but out of the different sports that you were doing, you ended up drawn towards Muay Thai. What was it that you loved and appreciated about Muay Thai specifically that brought you into that from the start?
I don't really know. That's just like so hard, you know, because I did it from such a young age. But I think it was just like the norm for me. But I really enjoyed it. I loved my training partners and the kind of family vibe. We weren't just, you know, everyone there at the gym was there for like the same reason, and we'd have a laugh. And you know, as a kid, like training with adults as well, it was just like a nice environment to be in, and there was just something about me where I just love to win. I just love to compete. I seen it as a challenge, and that was always my goal, is just to win. Like, I don't care who it's against or what it's doing. Even at school, I just love to win. And I don't really know like where that came from, but it was obviously just doing sport at a young age and just loving that winning feeling.
It's finding a challenge, isn't it? And I think it's finding something that makes you want to strive to push yourself a bit, and it's not just a bit meh and boring. And it's if that's what does it for you, it's finding something that gives you that outlet so that you actually feel like you're progressing, and it needs a relevant challenge.
I think as a child as well, I'd fight all of like the female kind of girls at my weight, and then I'd fight the older girls, and then I'd fight the boys, and I'd still win. And it was just like, you know, people would come up to me and say, "Oh, you did really well there. You were impressive," and things like that. And I think as a kid, I quite liked that, and I wanted to be a bit different, and that's what it was. People, I remember boys thinking they would be told, "Oh, you're fighting a man." He's like, "I'm not fighting a girl," and then I'd end up smashing them. Do you know what I mean? In a nice way, but
yes.
Did they not want to fight me because I was a girl, or actually they were scared of losing to a girl? I'm not sure. But, you know, at a certain age, obviously, you don't really fight boys anymore. But yeah, I enjoyed that as a kid, like fighting girls, fighting boys, kind of going up the ages. And even at the age of 13, by accident, I fought someone who was 30 years old. And that kind of dawned on me, like, oh my God. But you know what, like I earned my keep in there, and I beat her, and she was quite a good name as well. And I think that kind of experience that my dad gave me and the opportunities he gave me made me kind of the fighter I am today, and fighting people older, not too soon, but when I was ready. Do you know what I mean? And not kind of sticking at the same level.
Yeah, definitely. It's one of those things, getting the right level of challenge, and that's down to your coach kind of finding the right stuff for you to give you something to get your teeth into. It's not too easy. It's not way too far that you're going to get anxious about it, and just nibbling away and just constantly shifting up. And it's while we're kind of on this subject, there's something I was thinking about, because often fighters talk about they learn the most when they lose, and you haven't had a lot of losses really in your record. Is like there's the odd little sporadic loss here, and so it's like how do you keep moving up and learning lessons when the majority of your fights you win? And I was thinking, is that probably down to your dad Mark and the feedback he gives you, win or lose, because he's very clear, isn't he, on this is what you were doing right, this is what you were doing wrong, this is what we're working on. Would you say that's right?
I think that's right. I mean, I think I've had 5 losses over my career. Some were quite young. Some when I was like 12. One of them was controversial in Thailand. A couple of them are, I lost, fair enough. And I have learned from them. But I think you're right. When I win, it's not all, you know, daisies and daffodils. Like, you know, my dad will evaluate everything and say things. And sometimes I'll get a hard time in the gym, even if I've won a fight. You know, you did this, you did that. And when you look back at it, you're like, yeah, I did. Like, I was enjoying myself too much, or I dropped my guard then, or I picked up a bad technique. So, yeah, that it was always kind of crucial to kind of break down the fight, win or lose, and kind of evaluate it. Obviously, it wasn't always negative. Sometimes there was nothing else I could have done, or whatever. But yeah, sometimes there was things to take on board. And I think that's what you've got to do, not kind of be in this bubble when you win, and yeah, kind of learn from it every time, every fight, definitely.
And that's a certain kind of character trait, I guess, that you're able to do that, and you're able to take that, regardless of you winning, still being able to not see it as criticism, but as critique to help you get better. And
exactly.
I think that's one of your secrets to success, I'd say.
Yeah, I think because it's, again, from a young age, I've been used to it, but also, you know, I want to get better, and I do respect my dad, and I know he knows best. Sometimes when he says something, I'm like, that's not right. And then as we go on, we find it was right. And not that he's always right, but, you know, there's a pattern. So I think, you know, as you're growing up and you're learning, it was good to have him as my coach, because I didn't dare question him. You know what? And it's turned out pretty well, hasn't it?
It certainly has. Yeah. I'd love to know what you perhaps appreciate about Muay Thai now that you didn't at the start.
Oh, that's a really difficult question. I think, traveling the world and having the opportunities that it's given me, it is what a kind of great community we have worldwide. Like, I remember going to places like across the world, and people would be so nice and so polite and so welcoming, just because we had the same love for like Muay Thai, and they admire my fighting and things like that. And I think, I've got friends around the world now from this sport, that if I'm going to a certain country, I can message a person and be like, oh, do you want to meet up, or do you want to have coffee, or do you want to show me this, or do you want to help in my corner? And I think that's quite special to have that kind of thing. And it's people that I've fought before, or people who I know through other people, or I've met them at a show. It's not, it's mad. Like, I fought this girl called Joanna Ryberg from Sweden when I was 14. And she's just had a first baby not long ago, and it's actually born on the same day as me. That's when his birthday is. And we just keep in touch, like we have ever since we fought. And when I went and fought in Sweden, she braided my hair, and she came and showed me like where to go and things like that. Like, it's quite special actually when you think about it.
Yeah, the community in Muay Thai is different. I must admit, it's what's personally attracted and kept me in this environment. It's how I love the full-on aspect of Muay Thai. It's full contact and all the rest of it, but there is that supportive and respectful side to it as well that you don't see often in those kinds of the sports. I love that full contact challenge. That for me, anything else was a bit. It didn't get me going. But then with a lot of the sports that were like that, I also didn't like that almost a little bit more personal ego going on with a lot of them. That turned me off of it. And I think you summed it up there really well, actually. It is a small little niche kind of community, I guess, but we're also super passionate about it. And we kind of have the same drive and push on all of this. And great examples there with previous opponents having children, all the rest of it is great.
It is crazy, and it's like beautiful all in the same kind of way. It is really nice.
What's kept you going all these years despite all the challenges? Why are you still actually fighting, competing? Because I mean, how old were you? About sort of, well, you said you did your first interclub at like 4 or something.
Yeah,
it's a long time to be still doing it.
Yeah, well, I've just had my 29th birthday, and I don't know, things are just going so strong. Feel like sometimes it's like, oh, do I want to still do this? Of course I do. I'm here. I'm having some of the best fights of my life in the last few years. It's a shame. It's such a shame that COVID's happened and just kind of wasted 1.5 2 years. Like, it's been so frustrating. But I don't know. I don't know what would have happened. If COVID hadn't have happened, I would have had a lot more fights than where I am now. Like, so it's hard to say, but I just love it. I think it's interesting. As I'm getting older, I'm getting stronger. When people thought, that's it now, I kind of know a game. Well, it's not true. And it's just exciting to see kind of where it will lead to, and just carry on. Like, I don't know, it's just so difficult, and I'm so used to it. This is my life, that I think it's quite scary to imagine it without. I know at some point it's going to have to be, but I'm just kind of trying to still enjoy it while I can.
Yeah. And you have had a little experimental break, haven't you? Was it just after you finished school? You took a year out, really, didn't you? I mean, you'd been doing it a long time, and it's like, is this really what I want? And and you decided to come back to it, and I guess
Yeah.
with sort of renewed vigor and actually, yes, this is what I enjoy doing. So you've had a little taste of what it was like without it.
Yeah, I mean, because I was young and like a teenager, I was just doing teenage things, thinking I was missing out with my friends, and I don't know, it was just not for me. I'm not a massive drinker anyway, not now anyway. But when you're a teenager, you think you can drink before your time and drink more than you should, and stuff like that. But yeah, that I think I needed that for myself, because I've been heavily involved at such a young age. I needed it for myself to realise. And then I thought, this is going nowhere, and I kind of seen what I could have done in the sport, and I came back kind of a bit fresh faced and ready to face everything and tackle it. And I think that's when it really just clicked for me in my head, and I thought I could really do this. Don't know what I could do but I just wanted to see where the path would lead. And yeah, it's gone pretty well since then. I think that kind of made me a stronger person, have a stronger mind, and kind of know what I wanted to do for myself.
And I think that came at the right time as well, in terms of where your career was, in terms of your sort of like development as an athlete as well. It's one of those things that after that many years, you need to know, is this really what I want to do? There are so many avenues in my life I could approach. I've been tunneling myself down this direction, and it needs to be sort of coming from inside you that you're doing it, don't you? And you almost need to test that a little bit, and it's your opportunity to redirect yourself if you choose to, and it's like game on now, and I've almost got this out of my system, and I'm ready to push on, and it is really what I want, and I'm committing myself to this now.
That's exactly what it was.
And it's down to these sort of characteristics and traits of people as well, and I'd be interested to know what you feel the most important traits or characteristics for a champion to have from your experience.
Mate, the first one, 100%, a strong mind. It's difficult. You need to know what you need to do and what has to be like, kind of like the goalpost in a training camp. But at the minute, like, I'm not really training for a fight. I've got like July, so it's like not really far away, but I don't need to start running, like I say, in the morning yet and things like that. But last night I could not be bothered to go training. I had no motivation whatsoever, but I still went. I still showed up. I still trained. And I think that's what it's all about. We all have rubbish days where we don't want to, or sometimes we're poorly, but are we that poorly not to train? There's a difference between that. Sometimes you're poorly and you need to have a rest. And sometimes, are you poorly enough not to train? Do you know what I mean? Because like something my dad's always said that stuck with me, like you'll miss one session because, I don't know, you got a concert, and then you might miss another session because you're poorly, and then you miss another session because it's your birthday, and then all of a sudden you've missed 2 weeks without realising. So for me, it's kind of, I never missed a session, especially in a fight camp, never ever for any excuse, unless it was planned in a year in advance. I'd never miss a session, and that's even kind of the same thing out of a fight camp. It's important just to keep that kind of level as you go. And when you're training, sometimes I don't really need to be here, but you are, and that is kind of it's all adding up, whether you're in a fight camp or not. So I think just having the habits, having the right mentality, having a strong mind, I think it's just so important.
Yeah. And what do you think are the difference between those that are successful and that aren't successful despite having the same opportunities? So, circumstances and the opportunities to train, but some make it and some don't.
That's probably your mind. I don't know. There's something there. Or, some people might not have the right people behind them or the right kind of advice. But it's difficult because it's just crazy how everyone's in a different situation. We all have different backgrounds, different jobs, different minds. So it is difficult, and everyone is different. What works for one person might not work for the next person. So it's just about understanding yourself and what is right for you. And there's no right or wrong answer, and there's so many different ways that you can approach it. So it is just finding what is right for you and what works. And if you have this fight and you've lost, you've got to find out what didn't work for you, what could have changed, and then kind of rearrange things and try again. And that's it, just trying and trying again. Do you want it enough?
Yeah. Do you know what's a really good point I was just thinking of there, because it is down to having the right feedback and advice, but then it's like you say, the what works for each individual is so personal. And sometimes coaches are very intuitive, know you very well, and are very good at picking up on what to feed you and what not to feed you, what sort of turns you on and what turns you off. But then I think there's also a responsibility in the fighter themselves, that even when they're getting information that doesn't suit them, to have that responsibility to know what works for them, and to pick up on the stuff that's going to help them and almost ignore the stuff that isn't going to help them, and act as a bit of their own filter and know themselves a bit that way as well. That's
it's different. Like, for example, in between, like if I have a bit of a break in between fights, I should do weights to kind of make me a little bit stronger. Nothing heavy, like I've got the skinniest arms ever. But for example, my brother might not do something like that because he's a builder by trade. So he's constantly lifting things, daily. That's the only example I can think of.
There's certainly, you've got to personalize your approach. I'd love to know what you feel have been your biggest challenges to date, and what you've learned from them.
Oh God, I've had a lot of challenges. I think just sometimes day-to-day life, working, trying to hold down a full-time job, whereas also trying to train full-time and stay awake and be the best you can be is difficult sometimes. Sometimes plain sailing, some fight camps, it's finished already, and others in the past have been a real struggle, like just juggling everything. So I think sometimes that is difficult. But yeah, I don't know. That's a really difficult question.
I think that's a big part of it. The whole, there's the training stress that we've got, but then there's stresses outside of training that all heap into the same thing and take away from your recovery, whether it's work, whether it's sleep. I know we've mentioned sleep, nutrition, all this kind of stuff. It can end up just heaping up wrong, and it just ends up all lumped up. And it might be, I should be doing my hardest training sessions now, but conditions outside of training just mean this is going to be difficult, and I'm going to have to manage this now.
Yeah. You've kind of always got to try and put yourself first and do what's right for you. Sometimes I find there's not enough hours in the day as well. But it's always important to try and at a certain time of night, I try and turn my phone off or put it down to be prepared to get a full night's sleep, because I wake up at 6 a.m. to train. So, I used to get 8 hours, and now it's like about 7, because I don't end up finishing what I'm doing, get out of the shower after training, do this, do that, prepare this for work in the morning. Then all of a sudden it's 11 o'clock. I'm like, oh my God, need to go sleep. Yeah. So then it gets less. So I just think that's really important.
Sleep is one of those big ones, actually, and it's something. I thought I knew what it felt to be tired until my wife Deborah and we had our first kid, Adam, who's now 18, turning 19.
Oh wow!
But the whole sleepless nights and feeding and all this kind of stuff, and it was at that stage I realised, oh, this is what tired feels like, and I felt what it did to me, both in my physical performance in the gym and the stuff I was doing there, but I was also at the time I was my full-time job was a mechanical design engineer, and it was just how foggy brained I felt, and it
Yeah.
makes a hell of a difference. And then as soon as you get the sleep back on, it's like, whoa, now the volts are turned up everywhere. This feels
Feel
so
brand
much
new.
better.
Yeah.
Yeah.
See, I'm not gonna lie, I'm a bit like a baby. Like I need my sleep. I get a bit snappy and a bit ratty if I
Mm,
don't. But I sleep so well. Like touch wood, I can hit the pillow and I'll be asleep. I'm not one of these that struggle to get to sleep, so that works quite well in my favour. Also, love a nap. I love a nap.
mm.
Hate waking up. Like I just love sleep so much. But obviously you can go the other scale as well. If you sleep too much, it's going to make you feel groggy and even more tired. So it's so
Yeah,
crazy. You just got to get the balance right for everything.
yeah. It's personalized again. You got to know
Yeah.
yourself. How has your fight preparation changed from when you started up till now?
Um, I don't know. I think we've like changed little bits in the game. Um, and it's quite full on. It's very full on. I don't know if like training has changed. Obviously, it has a little bit through time. We do different things, like we do different drills that we used to do, and that's just kind of through like development. You know, like with little things like bungee cords and resistance training and different things. But I wouldn't say anything specifically has changed, but more just little bits like techniques and things like
Yes.
that.
Yeah. And if you could go back in time and change the way you were training, perhaps start doing something sooner that you found to be really helpful, what would that
Mm,
be?
probably change my kicking technique. Not my
Ah,
kicking
interesting.
technique, but what I did with my arms. I was when I used to kick, I used to be like that. So I'd leave this side quite open, which I learned in a fight once, and that was a bad experience. And then after that, we kind of changed the technique just so I'd have a real tight guard every time because I kick quite a lot, whether I know I
Mm,
do or like subconsciously. But so we kind of changed that after that fight, and it's worked really well since.
yeah. And with all the repetition that you had doing it the old way, did it take a lot
Mm.
of deliberate practice to
Oh
reprogram
my,
that?
yeah, oh a lot. And you know what? When you first start, like my shoulders were killing just from keeping your arms up all the time when kicking, and it's just little
Mm,
things you're like, oh wow, I didn't know that would affect that. So yeah, it was very difficult, and even now sometimes I don't do it all the time. But
yeah.
that's just me being lazy. But yeah, it was difficult and something that you just had to drill, drill, drill.
Yeah. And I think that's something as well that distinguishes between someone who is in the game long term and kind of represents a high level. They're willing to go back through something that seems relatively simple and basic,
Mhm.
and be to decide that they need to change something, and that it means there's going to be a lot of basic repetition now to rewire this, because I'm going to default back to what the habit I've done thousands of times over the years will
Yeah,
just emerge again unless I deliberately repeat that.
yeah,
Um,
no, exactly.
and it is like, if it's something brand new, there's a guy, Dr. Schmidt, who did a load of motor pattern learning stuff, and he rough numbers, he was saying like 300 to 500 repetitions when you've got no habit to change, and it will bank and become automatic. But then it's about 3 to 5,000 repetitions to reprogram something you're trying to change, and that's what you're
Hmm.
looking at. And that's where someone who's advanced will go away and do that repetition and just drill it, drill it, drill it, even though it seems like it's something basic. Otherwise,
Yeah,
you fall back to what you did, and like still
yeah,
doing it.
definitely. And sometimes it does get tedious and boring, and you kind of question why. But that's all training is at the end of the day. You know, you can do things to mix it up and make it a bit more interesting, but you are
Mm.
doing the same thing over and over again. You are running, you are um, doing pad work, you are clenching, you are doing your drills, and it is the same thing.
Yeah. It's the training is really about hiding repetition, isn't it? So
Yeah.
there's not too much monotony. psychologically going on, but it's part of what we have to do.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing I find that's fascinating is that when you're new to training, it's more obvious what you're doing wrong, and you get those right pretty quickly. But there'll be little bits, like you're talking about where your arms are as you're kicking, that falls through the cracks, and then by the time you've spotted that that's now the limiting factor rather than these really obvious things, it's bedded in and it's a habit. And now it's like, there's a lot of work now to change that. And it's only something relatively small, but now it is the big difference between me being successful at what I'm doing here or not.
Exactly.
Certain people are able to key in and focus on those, and others just like, I'll leave it. I'll let that kind of stagnate.
Yeah, and then that's how you learn the hard way if you do that.
Yeah. Finally, Iman, if you were to give one piece of advice to someone who wants to be as great as they can be, what would that be?
Just continue doing what you're doing. Things are not going to come overnight. You just got to carry on doing what you're doing, learn from the best, do your kind of research. I think that's the thing with the internet at the moment. You can pick up little things off different people and try it and see if it works for you. What is going to work for one person might not work for another. But if that's what my dad's always said, if you can just learn something and improve by 1%, or take something from someone else and it's going to improve your game by 1%, why not? And there's no harm in trying. So even like little things, I think recovery is really important. I also think stretching is so important. I really would swear by stretching and say that is a lot of the reason why I've not had, touch wood, so many injuries. I've been very, very lucky, and I stretch for 15 minutes before a session. So, like you warm up and then I do a 15-minute stretch before beginning pads. Same as after a run, I will do a 15-minute stretch, and it's really stretching your legs and your back and your arms. And I do swear by it. I don't do anything spectacular while I'm stretching. And I do realise, if I've had a bit of time off or miss a couple of stretches, I can really feel it. And I think it's very important. And also your recovery is so important, and just helping the game by 1%, having them cold baths, you might not think they're working, but they might be working. And just little things, I think, really.
I think that's really great. Thank you for sharing that. It's we're not looking for any one thing to be the game changer, are we? It's accumulating all those small little incremental gains together, and that's what makes the big difference. And not be looking for like one easy quick fix, because there isn't.
No.
There isn't.
Yeah.
There really isn't.
No. And that's the thing, that everyone is different. Everything is different about everyone. So if you're just taking a little snippet of someone or something, or a stretch, or a way to recover, or a certain drink, or something that you should eat more or less of, and it's going to help you. I think it's all just being open-minded and willing to learn and willing to try new things.
Brilliant. Thanks, Iman. I really appreciate you sharing some of what you've learned in your career so far, and I can't wait to see how you progress in the One Championship as well, and all the best with everything that you do.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. I've enjoyed it as well.
You can follow Iman on Instagram at PrettyKiller3, and follow Assassins Muay Thai on Facebook. And as usual, you'll find links to these with this episode.
Thanks for listening. If you found this valuable, please like, subscribe, and share with someone else it could help too. Please give the podcast a review or comment below. We'd love to hear from you. As always, you can visit Heatrick.com for more Muay Thai performance podcasts, videos, articles, and guides. Catch you next time.